Alpha Denshi was the architect to the Neo Geo multi-video system MVS, which was launched in 1990 to huge success. With a long history of making video games of their own, starting in 1980, some of their earlier games are now considered to be extremely rare and undocumented. Could this PCB be such a rare game, and that's never been dumped into MAME? Let's find out. Welcome back, Arcadians. Now, we've got some fantastic dedicated arcade machines here at the Arcade Archive, and since we've opened, we've actually accumulated hundreds of PCBs. And one of my main goals for this year is to take a look at some of these PCBs and try and get them working. So when you come down and visit, you can appreciate playing the games on original hardware. Now, if you can recall, very early on when the museum first opened, I went and visited an ex-operator in North London and bought 50 PCBs. Amongst all these PCBs, there were many common games like Mortal Kombat and lots of Street Fighters. But we also found some very rare and interesting games, some of which I've never seen or heard of before, which is basically what prompted this video. Like this one in particular. It's by a company called Alpha Denshi, who later changed their name to ADK Corporation in 1993. Alpha Denshi was a close partner with SNK and later contributed much of the hardware design for what would eventually become the Neo Geo. They had two launch titles for the Neo Geo AES, Magician Lord and Ninja Combat, and had a huge success with the Fatal Fury series. So as a result of all this success, they agreed to become an exclusive developer for SNK. So why have I picked this particular PCB out of all the other games out of that box I could have made a video out of, and they would have made just as good videos because there's some fantastic games in amongst that bunch? Well, it's because Alpha Denshi, to me, are quite an interesting company. Obviously, this is early Neo Geo hardware, but it's because they're not so well documented in their early days. There's not many people that know about their early games. I mean, in fact, the only game that I can remember playing from Alpha Denshi around the sort of mid-80s era was Equities, which was a fantastic top-down run-and-gun type game. But to be honest with you guys, I don't know what this game is, and that's what's exciting, because this could be a game that's not even been dumped into MAME. In fact, I've been informed by a MAME dev that this could be the English ROM set of a Japanese game called Gigitsu, which is basically like a top-down bump and jump type game, and it's called Violent Run. So the English ROM set of Gigitsu, which is called Violent Run, hasn't even been dumped yet, and it could be this. So this is really exciting. So I guess the only way to find out what it is to get the ROMs dumped, and we're going to turn to Richard for this because I've never seen the whole process of how ROMs get dumped. So we're going to go to the museum, dump the ROMs, and then we'll find out what this game is. But before we do any of that, we've got to clean this board up because it's absolutely filthy. The PCB has two layers with the soundboard sitting on top, and this adapter, which is an Electrocoin universal adapter. Now, you would have found this on many early Electrocoin cabinets like the Goliaths and the Midis, and right up until their last cabinet they produced, which was the Xenons, when they finally swapped over to Jammer. Now today I've got the luxury of using Holly's workbench, and she's kindly given me all the right kit, except the brush, she tells me, which needs a haircut. With my newly cropped brush, I can get in and amongst all of the components just to clear out all of that dust and dirt away, so it's nicer for us to handle later on when we go to dump the ROMs to see what game this is. To clean the main board, I'm going to have to remove the soundboard by disconnecting the ribbon cable and the plastic pillars that hold it in place. The electric coil adapter is actually hard soldered to the edge connector, so I'm just going to cut those wires as close to the edge connector as possible, and then at a later date we can give that a good clean, ready for its new Alpha Denshi to jammer adapter. With the daughter board now free, I can now thoroughly clean the main board underneath. It's great to see the name Alpha Denshi seeing the light of day, and years of all that dust and dirt being finally brushed away. Now with the PCB relatively clean, well, clean enough for Richard to at least examine the board and dump the ROMs, I'm interested to know what this main dev thinks this game could be, which is Violent Run. Now obviously I've never heard of this because it hasn't been dumped in MAME, but at least we can try out the Japanese ROM set in MAME, which has been dumped. So Holly's kindly set up a computer with MAME so we can play this game just to see what it looks like. And on first impressions, for me, it looks very similar to Data East Bump and Jump that came out 3 years previously. So basically, it's a vertical racing game that uses an 8-way joystick and 3 buttons. You control a futuristic armoured car that can attack a variety of enemy vehicles. For this, you have various weapons at your disposal. You can bump into the enemy cars to destroy them and jump to evade obstacles in the road, or just crush the enemies whilst trying to reach the garage to go to the next level. Now that's what we think the game could be. We're just guessing, guys, we really are, because Alpha Denshi released quite a lot of games in this era on this particular hardware, and any number of those games would be fantastic for the museum. I guess what we really need to do now is go up to the cave and see Richard and get his technical expertise on this particular PCB. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Alex.
We've got this really unusual board here, and I'm going to need your technical expertise on this one.
Okay.
Because I've been informed by MAME dev that this could actually be a game that's never been dumped. And I think going on these EPROMs here, he's looked at the VR and assumed it could be Violent Run.
Oh, okay. I don't know much about that. Tell me
that's
about
the
it.
English ROM set of the Japanese game Gengetsu, I think it's called, if I might not pronounce that right. But basically it's a top-down sort of bump and jump game.
Okay. Sounds interesting.
But we need to get this dumped, and that whole process I've never witnessed before. So it'd be quite interesting for me and the viewers to see that process.
Sure, yeah, okay. Well, it's not too difficult. All of the data that's stored for this game are stored in EPROMs, and these are windowed devices that use UV to erase them and are electrically programmed with an EPROM programmer. Back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, you used to be able to buy EPROM programmers to do a wide range of devices. They're still available today, but they're normally cheap and cheerful little boxes from China, which generally work okay, but it can be a little bit tricky sometimes with some of the devices. So we've got a full set downstairs that we can use to read each one of these devices and save it to a file. And really that's all we're doing. We're taking the data that's out of them, bring it into a buffer, and then saving that buffer to a file name in binary format.
What is a buffer?
Buffer, well, it's just a place in memory where the data can be read into and then viewed. So you can actually view it on the screen. Usually it's a whole load of scrambled data. Sometimes though, you can see human readable data in there, like the developers' names. That's quite common. So you would see a developer's name, you would see who created the code, usually a date and time, and usually a revision issue as well. So in a lot of the software we still produce today that goes into flash ROMs instead of EPROMs, you'll see a header file on there which has all of the information. So if we're lucky, one of these EPROMs might contain a header file that we can actually use to find out what it is.
So you can tell just from reading one EPROM what the game is.
Sometimes, yeah, it depends how the EPROMs are configured. So this is a 68000, which is a 16-bit processor, and each one of these EPROMs is an 8-bit device. So it's usually 2 devices with the data spread across them. Now that means if you read just one in, you're only going to get half the data. What we do have though is a soundboard that also contains data, and they're in 8-bit format because soundboards often do that. So they might be a little bit more forgiving for human readable information. Or once we've downloaded all the data, we can use a sum check on the EEPROMs to get a unique code for that data that's on there. And that's used as an ident in databases, in MAME and other things that we can actually then verify and check to see if they're in that database. If they are, they'll come up with a match and then they'll tell you what it is. If there's not, even if it's a tiny, tiny variation different, you'll see that it won't be able to identify that, and then that makes it a little bit more interesting. Who knows what it could be? But if it is the game you're thinking, we don't believe that's in MAME yet, so it's not been dumped. Yeah, okay. So it could be really interesting.
So why would there be variants of this game? Would that be just down to the evolution of the developers making the game better or easier for the kids to play? Or?
Yeah, usually different issues from release. So you might have first release, issue 1, and then you might have a 1.1 if they find a tiny little bug. That, so it's quite common with some of the really classic ones that you used to be able to get to a certain point in the screen and you could never die. And they would take those out. So there would be slight EEPROM revisions. Sometimes they used to send them out to the manufacturers with a new set of EEPROMs and put them in the board. Other times they didn't bother. They didn't bother updating them. So there could be all sorts of issues of different boards out there, depending on when the game was done, how popular it was as well. If they'd just done one run, you might just find they're all version 1. But if it was very popular, or if it was done in different regions, you might find that there's a Japanese version, the USA version, that sort of thing as well. So we should be able to tell something from the data that we can read. It may not be everything. We may still not be able to identify it until you get the board actually up and running and see what comes on the output. So yeah, we've got a lot to check out with this, but we've got all the software and the EEPROM programmers that we need to be able to read these devices. We've had a little look at what it is, and these are 27128s. They've got Fairchild on them. And all that means is that they have a certain signature byte that the programmer will realize and know what type of algorithm to use to read the data off. It's more important when you're programming them again, not so important when you're reading it, but it's nice to get them matched up as best as possible, really.
This is the really fun part. We're going to go downstairs now and dump the ROMs.
Yeah, let's go and rip them with the EEPROM programmer, yeah? Okay.
Excellent.
So, here we go. We are going to pop out one of the little EEPROMs. And we're going to put it in the reader. And then we've already selected our device type, which is the AM27128. And we can now go to read. And there you go, reads our buffer. It gives us a checksum, and that's unique to each one of these devices. And now we can just go File and Save. And we're going to save this as a binary format. We can save it in different formats, but we're going to save it as a binary file. Arcade AD for Alpha Denshi. And we're going to call this Sound 8. Okay, save successful. And then we repeat this process for every one of the EEPROMs on the board. Putting them back in the right locations. And hopefully none of them fail. If we do get a fail, that could mean that there's corruption or damage, or the legs just need a bit of a clean. So that's our soundboard data preserved. Now onto the main board, which we've got all of these devices. So we've got 5 over here, 2 here, and 4 down here. We've just taken this board downstairs and we've ripped the EEPROMs, which basically means just taking the data out of them. We had to use some Windows XP software, which is really quite old, but it matches the programmer from that era.
Right.
And that was the important thing, just to make sure that the software we're using matches the EEPROM reader to get these devices. We had to figure out what the EEPROM type was, and we used an AMD part in the end. Even though these are Fairchild devices, it has the same ident signature, so it will read the data back correctly. Sometimes if you get the wrong signature, it might be not quite right algorithm used for reading it back. So we took the EEPROMs off of the Soundboard first and read those, saved them into a file in binary format, so we can actually then use those files in an emulator or to program back into devices if we ever need to update these EEPROMs on this board, if they ever become damaged, for example. So at least we've saved it now. We've got all of that data. And after we'd got all of those files, we can actually find out what the game was.
Yeah, and this is how it happened.
I think it's going to be one of the scrolling shooter fighters.
Okay.
Shooter fighter?
Yeah.
Richard, what would you like it to be?
I know what I'd like it to be, but you know I've already looked at the buffer and I know the information's in there. So what I'm going to do is cover it up for you, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information and see how we go. Okay, so look away just for a second, just in case I don't know where the buffer pops up, somewhere around here. Okay, here we go. So I've got the information on here now, and I know it's human readable, so we can start human reading it. Okay, so we've got February the 12th, 1985. Any ideas?
No.
It's quite late.
Programmed by MC version 1 US. Okay, here it is. Are you ready?
Yeah.
This is a big reveal.
Splendor Blast! Yes!
Splendor Blast.
This is Splendor Blast.
That's that really cool game that looks like F-Zero.
It is.
It's like a racing game.
It's really cool.
Like the Mode 7.
Mode
Yeah,
7,
so you're
very
sort
early
of
Mode
going
7.
into the screen. It's a little bit 3D.
Yeah.
Looks
That's
really
brilliant.
cool. So it's a really good.
But it's not in MAME, that version.
Well, there is a version of Splendor Blast in MAME, but whether or not this is a slightly different version. But
No,
the main ROMs match up with the soundboard, so the soundboard is the same as the ROMs. So we have a good chance of having Splendor Blast.
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
Really
and they all
excited.
read fine, no problems. So it's a good chance that the board is in reasonably
to
good
see if the
condition.
board works.
Yeah, definitely.
So there you
You
go.
play the game.
So now you can do a bit of research to see whether or not our version is ever so slightly different. But it says version 1.0, so it is
An early version.
it is a very, very early version. 1985.
And how many versions of that game is there on MAME? Do you know?
Well, that's one thing to have a look at. Yeah.
You can't retire, Alex, but you've got a good
No,
game.
it's yeah, it's not bad. And
Fantastic.
Okay, so Alex, you now know what it is. We've done the reveal. It's a good game, though, isn't it?
It is a fantastic game. Yeah, it was one I was kind of guessing it could be.
Yeah.
For other collectors that knew the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, it looks like a very early F-Zero.
Yeah, you mentioned that when you were saying about what the games could be, and I had not seen this one before, and it looks really nice. It looks really, really nice.
It hasn't got the Mode 7 like on the Super Nintendo, but it's top down, it's a racer.
Yeah.
You can see where Nintendo got the ideas from, I reckon, anyway.
Definitely,
Looks super cool.
It is very cool. So, and I guess it's quite rare as well. I don't know if there's too many of those.
Yeah, I mean, all of these boards are quite rare, to be fair.
Yeah, yeah.
We did try and power this board up, Richard, didn't we?
Yeah, we checked it all out and powered it up, but we do have a RAM error on this board, which is not the end of the world. It is actually running code, the processor's running, the game's running. We've got some actual data on the screen. We just need to figure out what RAMs are faulty. It's quite a common thing on these types of boards. So it's going to be one of these ones over here, I expect. Hopefully, if the soundboard's all running, we should be able to hear some sound out there as well. But we can still take a look at the game on an emulator.
Which is what we're going to do now. Now, although I'm slightly disappointed we can't show you this running on original hardware, I'm still really excited knowing the fact that we've got an original board and we will get that working at some point. But for now, for the sake of this video, we're going to play it on emulation, and it is a fantastic game, it really is. It's a really fast-paced racing game with really detailed and colourful sprites. The game uses a two-way stick and two buttons, one for thrust and one for fire. And you've got to be quite tactical in how you race in this game because you've got an energy bar that's fast depleting. But you can pick up along the way energy capsules, and this is essential if you're going to finish the race. But it just means you've got to either slow down or veer off to the side to pick them up, which can affect your race position. And your position in the race matters if you want those bonus points. There are various other things you can pick up along the way which will improve your racing position. Shields come in very handy. You can literally collide into anything without crashing. Missiles also very handy when entering an asteroid belt. You can literally blast everything away. And you also can get a turbo, which I find a little bit difficult because it just speeds things up just that little bit too much. But right at the end, it could be handy. Overall, I found this a really enjoyable game, and you can really see the similarities between Nintendo's F-Zero. Now, once we've got the original board up and running, I'm going to do a live stream from this on my other channel, the Arcade Archive Vault, and hopefully you can join me for that. If you've got access to MAME, I totally recommend playing this game, and let me know in the comments below what you think, because I would love to know. But that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. We've got plenty more arcade PCBs to rummage through throughout the year, so look out for those. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.